Here are my top 10 counterintuitive tips for selling land. I'll go over each one in detail, but here's a brief overview. So why should you listen to me? The reason is because I've sold like 1,000 parcels of land. I sell exclusively land. I've been selling land for 20 years. So listen to the end. Maybe I will be able to convince you. Tip number 10, feature crappy structures. This is an example of a crappy structure. It is ancient. It is unlivable. It's a tear down. And you could direct your camera away from that structure and not feature it in your marketing, but I encourage you not to do that. And the reason is, when your image is featured on national portals like Zillow, it's going to be next to other listings that are similar, and you want yours to stand out. And if you include the crappy structure, as I have done right here, the buyer is going to be curious about what that is. They're going to click on it, and that's what you want. Here's another example of a teardown, but utilities are shown here. So when a buyer sees this, they may think, maybe there are utilities there. It's clearly buildable. That's what you want them to think, which is in fact true. Here is an example of a structure with no roof. Here's a brick wall, a wood wall, no roof, and a dead tree. That kind of thing is going to attract attention. Here's something that's not even a home. It is a fireplace with pretty green tile. That will cause a buyer to click on it. And here is just a vehicle, and you can see the land through the windows here. That's an attractive photo, and a buyer is likely to click on that. So the advantages of featuring crappy structures is that it signals to the buyer that the land is buildable. And when locating the land, when the buyer goes out there or an agent goes out there, it helps them to locate the land. It marks the spot. It breaks up the monotony of vegetation, dirt, and sky. It attracts attention on national portals. And most importantly, it conveys that utilities might be present. The irony of this is that the structure is actually unusable, and the thing that buyers want removed is the very thing that attracts their attention to begin with, and that's why this tip number 10 is counterintuitive. Tip number 9, hire an agent who lives far away from the land. So suppose you want to sell this desert property. It's near Palm Springs, and there are two agents you're thinking about. Agent A, their most recent sale is this high-end, multi-million-dollar modern home. It's only 5 miles away. And Agent B, their most recent sale is a piece of land. Agent B is 200 miles away. Which agent should you choose? Well, Agent A is a residential agent. Agent B is a land broker. So let's compare the two. Both of them have the very same real estate license. So they might be an agent, they might be a broker, they might be a principal broker, but the point is that they're all licensed by the California Department of Real Estate. There is no difference in the license. But Agent A, the residential agent, they have sold 0 land parcels in the last month. But they do have deep knowledge about things like pricing houses and condos, how to market homes, homeowners association, staging, and things like that. Agent B, the land broker, sells like 1 to 4 land parcels per month, and they have extensive knowledge about how to price land, how to market land, zoning, utilities access, and seller financing. And my advice to you is to go with Agent B, the land broker, even if they're not the closest agent to your land. So here's your land in Palm Springs. If you draw a circle around it, there's going to be 100,000 agents inside that circle, but they're probably all going to be residential agents. And the reason I say that is because land brokers are rare, and you do want a land broker, so by definition, you're going to be choosing someone that is not, within a 5-minute drive of your land. I actually looked in the MLS to see how many land parcels a typical realtor sells in a 90-day period, and I found that out of 100,000 and more agents, 99% of them actually sold 0 parcels of land in the last 90 days. Now, they may have sold houses and condos, I didn't look at that, but 0 parcels of land. Less than 1% of agents sell between 1 and 15 parcels of land in 90 days. So maybe you've heard the 80-20 rule, 20% of the agents sell 80% of the listings. But when it comes to vacant land, it's more like 1% of the agents sell 99% of the listings. Counterintuitive tip number 8. Now this one you're really gonna think I'm crazy on. Don't insist on showing land. Here's an example of an agent putting in their marketing in the MLS that showing is by appointment only. Here's another example. The agent says, do not walk on the property without an appointment. This one says that there's a locked gate, which is really the same thing as saying you're gonna need an appointment to see this land. Now, there are really two approaches. Let's compare 2 agents. These are new agents, Agent C and D. Agent C absolutely requires the appointment. It's mandatory. Agent D is willing to make an appointment, but they don't require it. And they encourage the buyer to go anytime, walk the land, and they provide clear maps and directions. So Agent C, because they're mandating an appointment, they don't bother to write directions. They just say located in the Orchard subdivision, call the agent, because they're imagining they're going to go out there with the buyer. Agent D provides super detailed, extremely clear directions that any buyer can follow. Agent C posts an unhelpful map that doesn't even show where the land is, and Agent D posts an aerial map which shows addresses of adjacent homes and the street name and the boundaries of the property. So let's do the math and you'll see why Agent D is doing it right. So here's Agent C. They require an appointment. Imagine there's 100 potential buyers, and out of those 100, 80 of them, let's say, call the agent, but 20 of them do not call the agent. They see that the appointment is mandated and they think, I really don't want to make an appointment with this agent. I'm looking at 5 different parcels. I don't want to call 5 different agents. I think I'll just look at something else. But of the 80 that contact the agent, let's say 40 of them have no further interest. Maybe they find out it's just not their cup of tea. Maybe it's landlocked or it doesn't have utilities or something, and they have no further interest, which is fine. And 40 want to view the land. Now, of those 40, 2 will only go see the land if it's with the agent, and that's fine with this agent. But 8 will only go see the land if they can go anytime without an appointment, without meeting the agent, and 30 will go either way. So in this case, 32 buyers are going to end up seeing the land. Those are the ones in green. And by the way, these are hypothetical numbers just based on my 2 decades of experience selling land. They're here just to illustrate a point. Now, Agent D does it the right way. Agent D posts super clear maps and directions and encourages buyer to go see the land if they want to. So out of 100 buyers, 20 of those are not even going to call the agent. They're going to hop in their car and go see the land. Of the ones that call the agent, again, half will have no further interest. Of the ones that want to view the land, 2 will only go by appointment, which this agent will do. 8 only if they can see the land anytime, and 30 either way. So this agent who is willing to show the land but not mandating it, they're going to end up with 60 buyers seeing the land. And 60 is a bigger number than 32, so you can see why this is a better strategy. So who are these buyers that don't want to make an appointment with an agent to see the land? Well, they might be sophisticated agents. They might have access to geographic information systems. They might be accustomed to going out and viewing land on their own. They don't need the help of an agent. They don't see any need to make an appointment. Others might be what I call disorganized buyers who are maybe not appointment people. They're the kind who miss appointments, who are not inclined to, make an appointment. They're just not organized to do that. Their life is maybe chaotic, let's put it that way. They might be busy buyers with limited availability. Maybe they're only available for 2 hours Saturday afternoon, and that doesn't work out for the agent. Maybe they're impatient. Actually, this is the one that's most likely. They're impatient buyers who just want to get in their car and go right now to see the land and not wait around for an appointment. Or they might be buyers who are allergic to agents. So requiring appointments my broader point here is that it's a source of friction, and you want to minimize friction when you're selling land. Why do agents create this kind of friction? Well, it's a habit from selling houses. They forget that land is not under lock and key usually. And by the way, if it is in a locked, gated community, then you can forget this tip. But most land is not under lock and key, and that's something that they forget. Agents tend to have a misguided belief that buyers cannot locate land, which is not the case. They can if you provide maps and directions. They may have a false notion that they can persuade buyers to purchase the land if they are present walking the land. But more commonly, they want to capture buyers. And what I mean by that is they want to meet the buyer at the property, show the buyer the land. If it doesn't meet the buyer's needs, they want to show them 5 other parcels. So sources of friction are things like a locked gate. I encourage you to leave gates open during the listing period. No trespassing signs. A buyer will drive up to this and they will feel unwelcome, and they'll be worried about what's on the other side of the sign. An owner or caretaker on the land, like Uncle Freddie living in his RV, buyers really don't like to go to property where someone is staying. Corners are not marked. No maps and directions, requiring an appointment. So my advice to you is to eliminate all friction, and you can make an appointment, but don't mandate appointments. Tip number 7, stop negotiating closing costs. Here's a typical negotiation. This is the seller in gray and the buyer in blue. There's no agent here. The seller says the price is $100,000, the buyer says $80,000, the seller says $95,000, the buyer says $85,000, and back and forth until finally the buyer says, okay, I'll accept your last price of $90,000, but I want you to pay all escrow and title closing costs. That's a typical negotiation. I encourage you not to do it that way. My tip is to simplify it, and when you get to the end, just figure out what closing costs would be, maybe $2,000, and come up with a price that is equivalent to the other guy carrying the closing costs. Give him that price and negotiate only on price. Keep it simple. And the psychology behind this tip is that buyers and sellers really hate to pay what they perceive as the other person's costs. They feel like everyone should carry their own weight. And it feels like you're trying to slip costs into the fine print of the deal, which is exactly what you're doing. It leads to endless back and forth. So they will have discussions about what are the closing costs, what's included in that, who is the escrow, who is the title company, and it'll just take time. And the result is friction and delay does kill deals. So a buyer may find another new shiny object and run off, and that will leave the seller in a lurch, or the seller may get an offer from a better buyer, and then the buyer will have to exit. So you want to minimize all friction and delay. Here's what I mean about conflict about closing costs. Now, I have my idea about what is considered to be a, quote, closing cost, and it does not include everything in this list. But it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is that the buyer is going to define closing costs in a way that benefits them, and the seller is going to define it in a way that benefits them, and there's going to be conflict. Conflict takes time, and it could kill the deal. So you want to avoid that. More generally, my advice is to negotiate on one thing, not two. Just negotiate on price, and don't negotiate on closing costs. Tip number 6. You may think you're selling land, but you're not selling land. You're actually selling utilities, zoning, and access. So when agents write marketing descriptions, generally half of it is a description of the dirt and maybe the area where the dirt is located, maybe the city or the community. 35% of it is what I call flowery nonsense. Things like, build your dream home here, or will not last, or something like that. And they devote very little space to utilities, zoning, and access. But based on all of my experience selling land, I know that buyers are really interested in figuring out if the land is buildable and if they can afford it. So minimize that flowery nonsense and devote at least a fifth of the space to explaining what the utilities are. Like, is there water in the street? Is there a perk test for septic? Is electricity there? And so forth. Describe zoning. For example, is it residential? Is an accessory dwelling unit allowed? things like that. And is there access? Is it landlocked, or is it a paved street, or what is it? And then if there's seller financing offered, be sure to put that in black and white in your description. Counterintuitive tip number 5. Pricing to allow room for negotiation, the so-called wiggle room, is actually not mandatory. So here's an example. These are 3 different parcels that are similar, and you can see they're priced at 3 different levels. And let's say you want to sell a piece of land and you want to get a good price and you want to allow room for negotiation, so you price your land here. The problem is when the economy is terrible and there are many, many, many parcels on the market that are not selling, pricing to allow wiggle room is not a good strategy. You might even price it here to allow some room for negotiation, also not a good strategy. Even if you price it here to allow a little bit of room for negotiation, that's not going to work either. You are going to have to price it here at something like $170,000. You need to basically undercut all of your competition in an economy like this. So the good news, though, is that after you undercut your competition on your listing price, you do not actually have to negotiate on price. You don't have to come down. So if your price is $170 and a buyer offers $150, thinking that there's room for negotiation, you can just counter back at $170. I mean, you're the cheapest lot in town, so they can sort of take it or leave it, and usually they will take it. So my point here is, when the economy is terrible, don't worry about negotiating on. Don't worry about that room for negotiation issue. Just get the offer, any offer, and then hold firm. So it is not mandatory to negotiate on price. Tip number 4, lead with radical candor about bad facts. Here are some examples of bad facts. For example, the parcel might be landlocked. It might have no legal access, no easement, no street going to it, no dirt road. You can't put your feet on it. And when you cross the land to get to yours, you would be trespassing. That's what I mean by landlocked. Maybe it didn't perk for septic and there is no sewer. Maybe it's in a flood zone. Maybe the HOA doesn't allow tiny homes, and this is in an area, a rural area where people like to go for recreation. Maybe there's a conservation easement preventing all building. These are bad facts. I encourage you to consider adopting this trial attorney strategy that I read about. It's called inoculation or preemptive disclosure. And the way it works is that if a defense attorney is representing someone who is a bad person, and there are many bad facts, they can vaccinate the jury against harmful evidence by introducing bad evidence related to their own client in sort of a controlled way. And if the jury hears the bad fact first from the defense, it feels less damaging. And they sort of come to trust the defense and feel like they are trustworthy attorneys. So I encourage you to beware the delta. And what I mean by that, when I think of the delta, that's the difference between the reality of what the land is really like and buyer's perception of what the land is like. So for example, if you advertise 640 acres at $100,000 in California, the buyer is going to be imagining that they can have a vast farm of 640 acres and room for horses and maybe multiple homes. And that is just not the reality. For example, let's say it's landlocked and you can't even get to it, and it's not zoned for agriculture. So when there's a large delta, here's what happens. The agent extols the virtues of the land and just totally leaves out the bad facts. That'll lead to many, many, many inquiries. The agent's phone is going to ring off the hook. But eventually that buyer is going to discover bad facts. They're going to either hear it from the agent or a neighbor or discover it online, and then they're going to distrust the agent and feel annoyed, and they're going to disappear, and the agent will get 0 offers. When there's a small difference between the reality and what the buyer thinks the reality is, because this inoculation strategy is used, you'll get few inquiries. So instead of 100 inquiries, maybe you'll get 10. But those 10 buyers are going to be aware of those bad facts up front. There's a small delta. Maybe you'll get 1 offer, and 1 offer is way better than getting 0 offers. Tip number 3, seller financing is not charity for the buyer, it's an investment opportunity for the seller. So imagine you're a seller and you price your land at $100,000, and here's an offer that you receive. The offer is full price, but the buyer is not going to pay you all cash. They're proposing to pay you $20,000 down and then make payments over 5 years at a 10% interest rate. Now, when my sellers get an offer like this, they usually think, what is wrong with this buyer? I want all cash. Why can't they get a bank loan and cash me out? This buyer must have terrible credit. They're not going to pay me. I'm worried. I don't like this offer. But I encourage my sellers to consider it as an investment opportunity for themselves, and just forget about what the buyer wants. Think about what's in your best interest, Mr. Seller. So if you agree to seller financing, it sort of works like an investment for you. Or you could require cash, and then you could put that in the stock market, and that would also be an investment. So let's compare the two. With seller financing, your investment is secured by real estate. In the stock market, it's unsecured. And if the buyer doesn't pay you and they default, you might even think of that as an opportunity, as some of my clients do, because you can keep their large deposit, you can keep all of the payments they've made to date, you can call up the trustee if it's a trust deed and pay the trustee a few $1,000s to foreclose, take the land back, resell it in a better economy, and some sellers almost like it when the buyer defaults. With a stock market, your stock could go to zero and you have no way of recovering from that loss like you do with seller financing. You can demand a 10% fixed interest rate with seller financing. In the stock market, you might earn 10%, but it's going to be variable and uncertain. With seller financing, I've carried a loan for people, and I have someone recently who was late on their payments 7 times, and each time I charged him a high late fee of $100. So that's an extra $700 in my pocket. I consider that a bonus, and there's nothing like that in the stock market. Seller financing is an opportunity to diversify your investment portfolio. Most investment portfolios in the stock market are only like 2 to 5% real estate, so consider that as a benefit to you. Now, if you're willing to carry the loan, I recommend that you not wait till you get an offer like that, and instead advise your agent right up front that you're willing to do that, and let them put it in black and white in the MLS, because your land is more likely to sell at a higher price if you agree to carry the loan. Tip number 2, free images cost more than professional photos. Now, I usually get professional photos. They cost between $250 and $500, and that includes drone photos. And here are some examples of what a free image and a professional image might look like. This is the same piece of land. I tend to take over listings after the previous agent did not sell it successfully, and this is the previous agent's photo, and this is what a professional photo looks like of the very same parcel. Here's what a free photo would look like. This is another agent, and here is a professional photo. Here you can see snow-capped peaks, palm trees, blue sky, good framing. And here what you see, this photo is 1/3 concrete and 5 trees and no view. So this is definitely a better photo. Here is another agent's photo for a listing I took over. You can see this is a much better photo. And the thing is, photos are not just a little bit important. They are very, very, very important if you want to sell your land faster and for more money. Now, the reason you might consider just taking a free photo with your cell phone is, the cost is zero, and you're thinking you're going to net more money if you pay zero for photos. If you pay $500 for photos, your net is less. That's what you're thinking. But the reality is not like that. The reality is you're very unlikely to sell your land if your photos are terrible, and you're more likely to sell your land if they're professional. And so you end up getting $0 with those free photos and $9,500 with the paid photos. Tip number 1, don't base your price on what other parcels have sold for. Now, my clients love it when I say that, because they think I'm telling them they can just price it any way they want. It doesn't matter. They can ask for twice the value. And that is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying ignore all data. I'm not saying sellers choose any price you want. Buyers can always make an offer. And I'm not saying Your land is better than theirs, price it anyway. You price it above the others. And I'm not saying those other sellers who accepted those low prices were crazy. You do you. And I'm also not saying I'm the best agent in the universe and I can get you any price you want. What I am saying is don't base your list price exclusively on sold comparable properties, so-called comps. Don't rely on the average sale and definitely don't use the highest sale. Remember, you are not competing with sold properties. By definition, they are off the market. They are not your competition. So focus far more on active listings, those that are on the market, and avoid a kind of a closed-minded, myopic view of the competition. Don't just look at other active listings on your block or in your community or in your city or county, because buyers are taking a very wide view in their search for land. So you need to consider competition, from miles and miles away, and price your land to compete with properties that are available for sale. So let me give you an example. Here is a neighborhood, and all of these parcels are really basically the same. It's just a cookie cutter neighborhood, and here is the parcel you want to sell with the red X. Now you notice that one parcel sold 6 months ago for $75,000. This parcel sold 1 year ago for $95,000. The average is $85,000. So maybe you think, well, I'm going to base my price on sold comps. I'm going to base it at the average, $85,000. The problem with that logic is these are the properties available for sale that you're competing with. And what's going to happen is the one priced at $60,000 will sell, and then it'll be off the market. Then the one at $65,000 will sell at some price, and then the one priced at $70,000 will sell, and then this one at $75,000 and this one at $80,000, and then maybe 3 years from now yours will sell. And that's because you did not base your price on your competition. So in summary, when selling land, think out of the box, don't be a sheep, question conventional wisdom. And do you disagree with any of my unconventional tips? If so, leave a comment down below. I'd love to know.